7 years ago, she buried him in her heart. 7 years later, he walked into the restaurant where she worked, in a $1 million black suit surrounded by stony bodyguards. Lena Hartwell thought she had forgotten Roman Vale, until his eyes fell on the 6-year-old arranging menus behind the counter, until she called his name, Caspian Vale. Come here to mommy. And Roman Vale, Chicago's most fearsome mob boss, stood motionless in the crowded restaurant, because that child bore his last name, because that child was him, miniature. Like and comment the city you're viewing so I know how far this story has come. Don't go anywhere. This is just the beginning. The rain came in sideways off Lake Michigan that Tuesday, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack, driving needles of cold into every gap and every collar, turning the waterfront into a gray blur of headlights and wet concrete. Inside Harlow's, the noise was thick. Flatware scraping, voices overlapping, the hiss of the kitchen passed through every 40 seconds. The place smelled like garlic butter and damp wool, and the particular desperation of a Tuesday dinner rush, when half the waitstaff had called out sick. Lena Hartwell moved between tables with the economy of someone who had been doing this for years without ever intending to. She was 31 years old, and her feet hurt the way they always hurt by 7:30. A deep structural ache that started in her arches and climbed her calves by closing time. She carried 2 plates of pasta in her left arm and a glass of Merlot balanced in her right hand, and she was already calculating the next 4 steps before she'd finished depositing these ones. Table 7 needed their check. Table 12 had been waiting 12 minutes for bread. The couple in the corner booth had that particular stillness that meant they were fighting without speaking, which meant they'd either tip badly from embarrassment or generously from guilt, and she'd learned to read that distinction years ago. She set the pasta down, smiled at the man who immediately began telling her the portion looked smaller than last time and said, "I can check with the kitchen," in the tone that meant she absolutely would not be checking with the kitchen. Behind the host stand near the service corridor, her son sat cross-legged on a folded apron, working through a worksheet from his homework folder. 6 years old and already with her stubbornness about finishing things, he wouldn't look up from that paper until every blank was filled. She knew it. She'd made the mistake once of telling him he could stop when he was tired, and he'd given her a look that belonged on a much older face and said he wasn't tired, he was thinking. She hadn't made that mistake again. Caspian Vale. She'd chosen the name the way she'd chosen everything in those first months alone, with a kind of furious tenderness, digging her heels in against a world that kept suggesting she ought to make different choices. The surname had raised eyebrows. Her mother had asked gently if that was wise. Lena hadn't answered. She'd written it on the birth certificate with steady hands and hadn't apologized for it since. She was cutting through the service corridor toward the kitchen when the front door opened. She didn't see it happen. She heard it. Not the door itself, but the quality of silence that followed. The specific flattening of ambient noise that meant something in the room had shifted. She'd lived in enough uncertain circumstances to trust that instinct. She paused at the pass-through window and looked back toward the entrance. 4 men had come in from the rain. The 2 flanking the door were built wide, hands loose at their sides in the particular way that suggested they were accustomed to having their hands be relevant. The 3rd stood slightly behind and to the left of the 4th, head constantly moving in small increments, scanning, cataloging, discarding. Professional. The 4th man stood at the front and didn't scan anything because he didn't need to. The room had already arranged itself around him without being asked. He was wearing a black wool coat that cost more than Lena made in 2 months. His hair was darker than she remembered, cut close on the sides now. There was a scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. Thin, deliberate looking, like a sentence that got interrupted. He was taller somehow, or maybe he'd just learned how to take up space differently. His jaw was set in a way she recognized from 7 years ago, the particular tension of a man who was always partly somewhere else in his head, calculating angles she couldn't see. Roman Vale was standing in the doorway of Harlow's restaurant on a Tuesday night in November, and he was not dead. The air left Lena's chest in a single slow collapse. She had been told he was dead. She had been told by the kind of people who would know. Men with flat voices and careful eyes who'd shown up at her apartment 11 days after he disappeared and explained, without emotion, that Roman Vale had been involved in something that had ended badly for everyone involved, and that she should consider the matter closed and herself fortunate to be outside of it. She'd shut the door in their faces. She'd sat on her kitchen floor for 4 hours. And then she'd gotten up because there was nothing else to do and because she'd already missed 2 shifts and her rent was due. She had grieved him. Properly, quietly, alone. No one to grieve with her because no one had known what he was to her. Not really. And then she'd found out about the pregnancy, and grief had been forced underground by sheer necessity, buried under prenatal appointments and lease negotiations, and the logistics of building a life for 2 with the resources of 1. She had not been prepared for this. Roman was speaking to the host, a young man named Derek, who looked appropriately unnerved. The 2 men at the door had not moved. The one doing the scanning had clocked the room's exits. Lena had watched his eyes do it. She pressed herself flat against the corridor wall, out of the sight line from the entrance, and made herself breathe. Her son was 15 feet away, visible from the front of the restaurant. She moved before she'd finished thinking it through, stepping out of the corridor and crossing toward the host stand with the specific velocity of someone who is not running, but would very much like to be. Caspian was still working on his worksheet. He'd gotten to the math section. She could see his lips moving slightly as he counted. Cass, she kept her voice level. Hey, come on, let's go in the back for a bit. He looked up. I'm not done. I know, bring it with you. Mom. He said it the way 6-year-olds say it when they feel they are being fundamentally misunderstood. I have 3 more. Caspian. She was crouching now, eye level with him, and she'd modulated her voice carefully, but something in it must have registered because he read her face for a moment the way he sometimes did. That old soul reading, that strange perceptiveness that still caught her off guard sometimes, and began gathering his papers. She had her hand on his shoulder and was steering him toward the service corridor when she heard Derek say, behind her, Of course, sir, right this way, and she felt the shift in the room that meant people were moving. She made the mistake of looking back. Roman was looking directly at her. The distance between them was maybe 20 feet. He had stopped walking. Derek had taken 2 more steps before realizing his party was no longer following and now hovered uncertainly between them. The 2 doormen had gone still. The room had not gone quiet exactly, but it had thinned, conversations losing their thread, forks pausing. Lena stopped breathing. Roman's face did something complicated. Recognition, obviously. Immediate and total, no hesitation in it. But underneath that, something she couldn't read, something that moved through his expression like a current under ice. His eyes went from her face to the boy at her side, and she watched him see Caspian for the first time, and she watched his face change in a way she had no category for. Caspian, oblivious, had his worksheet in one hand and was leaning slightly against her leg. He looked up at the man across the restaurant with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend he isn't looking. Mom, he said conversationally, who's that? The silence stretched another half-second longer than it should have. Then Roman Vale turned to Derek and said something quietly, and Derek nodded and walked away. And Roman's 2 rear men stepped back toward the entrance, and the scanning man took a position near the bar that was somehow both unobtrusive and absolute. And Roman walked toward her. Lena put herself between him and Caspian without deciding to. It just happened, her body making the decision her mind hadn't finished making yet. She squared her shoulders. She kept her face very still. He stopped 4 feet away. Up close, the scar above his eyebrow was more visible, and there was something different in the set of his mouth. A compression, a weight. His eyes were still the same gray-green she'd spent 7 years trying not to remember. They were on her face now, not on Caspian. Lena. His voice was lower than it used to be, quieter. Men who'd learned that people would strain to hear them often spoke quietly. We're closed, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. The sign says 9. We're doing a private event. He looked at the restaurant full of paying customers and didn't say anything. She held his gaze and did not let her hands shake. What do you want, Roman? To sit down. He said it evenly. And talk. I'm working. I know. He said it like it meant something, like he'd already been aware of this before walking in. I know you're working. The implication of that landed somewhere cold in her chest. How long? She stopped, rephrased. Why are you here? Because I was in the city, he said. And because I heard... He stopped. His eyes moved to Caspian again, just for a moment, and something in his jaw tightened. I heard you were here. She heard you were here. She filed that away. The shape of it, the things it implied about the kind of information networks Roman Vale apparently maintained, about the fact that he'd been in Chicago long enough to hear things. She filed it away and kept her face neutral. Mom. Caspian tugged her sleeve. I'm hungry. She looked down at him. He was squinting up at Roman with an expression of mild judicial assessment, the worksheet tucked under his arm, his dark hair falling across his forehead in the same way his father's used to. She had made her peace. She thought she'd made her peace with how much he looked like Roman. She'd had 6 years to get used to it. But watching Roman see it for the first time, watching the recognition work through him. Cass, she kept her voice steady. Go ask Maria if she can get you something from the kitchen. I'll be right there. Caspian looked between them with that precocious suspicion. Who is he? Someone I used to know. Go. He gave Roman one more long look, unafraid, direct, a little judgmental in the specific way of children who haven't learned yet to perform deference, and then turned and walked toward the kitchen with his worksheet. The moment he was through the door, Lena turned back to Roman and the careful neutrality left her face. Get out, she said, low and flat. You don't get to just walk in here. Lena, no, you don't get to do that. You were dead. I was told you were dead. I know what you were told. 7 years, she said. The words were very controlled. She had spent a lot of years developing that control, and she was grateful for it now. 7 years, and you just... She stopped. She was aware they were in a public room. She was aware her coworkers were pretending not to watch. I can't do this here. Then tell me when and where. I can't. She shook her head. I can't. Whatever this is, Roman, whatever you think is going to happen, that's my son. He said it quietly, not a question. The quietness of it was more than she could have handled if he'd said it loud. She said nothing. His jaw worked. Lena, that's my son. You don't know that. He has my name. His voice hadn't changed volume, but something in it had changed. You gave him my name. She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had walked out of a past she'd sealed over and buried, who was standing in her restaurant in his expensive coat with his bodyguards and his scar, and 7 years of absence written in every line of his face. She looked at him and she felt things she didn't have names for, and she said, You need to leave. I'm not leaving. Then I'll call the police. Something shifted in his expression. Not hurt, not exactly. Something more controlled than hurt. Something that had learned to look like stillness. Okay, he said. Do that. She didn't move. He didn't move. From the kitchen, she could hear Caspian asking Maria if there were any of the bread rolls left from the afternoon service. She could hear Maria laughing, saying, of course, sit down, sweetheart. She heard her son laugh at something, that sudden, unguarded laugh he had, the one that came out of nowhere and sounded like someone had caught him off guard with something funny. And she watched Roman Vale hear it too. She watched it hit him. Tomorrow, she said finally. Her voice was barely above the ambient noise of the restaurant. Tomorrow morning, there's a coffee place on Meridian. It's called Foundry, 10 o'clock. We talk. She met his eyes. That's all we do. We talk. He studied her for a moment. All right. And Roman. She held his gaze until she was certain he understood she meant this. You don't come here again. You don't come near him again. Not until I say. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, is he, He stopped. He seemed to be having difficulty with the sentence. Is he all right? He searched for the word. He seems, he's fine, she said. He's always been fine. I made sure of it. The weight of that landed between them, and she let it. Roman nodded once. He turned. He walked back toward the entrance, and the 2 doormen fell in around him, and the scanning man rose smoothly from his position at the bar. At the door, Roman paused for one moment without turning around. Then he pushed through and was gone, and the cold air came in briefly before the door swung shut, and the room resumed breathing. Lena stood in the middle of Harlow's restaurant and kept her face entirely still while her entire body shook. She went to the kitchen. She found Caspian on a stool by the prep counter eating a bread roll and telling Maria about his worksheet, explaining with some enthusiasm that he had gotten all the math ones right by himself. Lena stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. His dark hair, his jaw, even at 6, already carrying the particular set of Roman Vale's jaw. His hands, gesturing as he talked. She pressed her palm against the doorframe. She had 11 hours until Foundry Coffee on Meridian. She had 11 hours to decide what version of the truth she was going to tell, and how much of it, and in what order. And she already knew that every version she constructed was going to hurt going in and coming out. She'd made her choices. She'd make them again. She'd do whatever she had to do to keep Caspian exactly where he was. In this kitchen, eating bread, unaware of the weight of what had just walked through that door. But Roman Vale had looked at her son, and she'd watched understanding move through him like something tectonic, like something that couldn't be made unhappened, and she knew with the sick certainty of someone who has survived by reading situations clearly that nothing about their lives was going to look the same after tomorrow morning. She just didn't know yet how much worse it was about to get. She crossed the kitchen, sat beside Caspian, stole a piece of his bread roll. He protested loudly. She told him he'd eaten enough. He told her he hadn't. She pulled him close with one arm and pressed her face briefly into his hair and let herself feel, just for a second, the full weight of what she was carrying. He patted her arm with the distracted affection of a child who is more focused on his bread roll. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah, baby," she said. "I'm good." Outside, the rain kept coming in off the lake, cold and sideways and relentless. And somewhere in the city, the man she had spent 7 years mourning was climbing into an armored car with her son's face written across his features. And whatever was coming next, it was already in motion, and there was no version of tomorrow where she got to stop it. She held her son a little tighter. She breathed. She let herself have this one last moment of ordinary Tuesday night before everything changed. The coffee place on Meridian opened at 7, but Lena arrived at 9:45 and sat with her back to the wall and her hands around a cup she hadn't drunk from yet. Foundry was the kind of place that tried hard not to look like it was trying hard. Exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu written in 3 different people's handwriting. Tuesday morning crowd, laptops, headphones, a woman in scrubs working through a muffin with the focused desperation of someone between shifts. Nobody looked at Lena. Nobody had any reason to. She'd dropped Caspian at school at 8:10. He'd been arguing about his jacket, said it made him look like a marshmallow, which was so specific and so Roman in its stubbornness that she'd had to turn away while she zipped it up so he wouldn't see her face. She'd watched him go through the gate. She'd sat in her car for 6 minutes in the drop-off lane until someone honked. Now she was here, and her coffee was going cold, and Roman Vale walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. He was in different clothes, dark gray this time, no tie. The coat still expensive, but less deliberate about it. The scanning man from last night was outside. She'd clocked him on the sidewalk as she came in. Roman scanned the room once when he entered, found her, and came directly over without stopping at the counter. He sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said. "You look like you have people who watch my building," she said. Something in his expression acknowledged this without apologizing for it. "I needed to know you were—" "Don't." She said it flat and clean. "Don't tell me it was for my protection. We haven't established that you get to protect me." He was quiet. He put his hands on the table, large hands, a new scar across the left knuckles she didn't remember. And he looked at them for a moment and then at her. "All right," he said. "Tell me." "Tell you what?" "Everything." His voice was even. "From the beginning." She looked at him across the table in the noise of a Tuesday morning coffee shop, and she thought about how many times she'd rehearsed this, how many versions she'd constructed during the night when sleep wouldn't come, how many ways she'd found to say it that protected her, that gave less away, that kept her on stable ground. And then she thought about Caspian in his marshmallow jacket going through that school gate, and she decided that the only version that mattered was the true one. 11 days after you disappeared," she said, 2 men came to my apartment and told me you were dead. Involved in something, gone badly, closed matter. They didn't give me specifics. She kept her eyes on his. 3 weeks after that, I found out I was pregnant. Roman didn't move. I was 24 years old, she said. I had $400 in my checking account and a waitressing job and a lease I could barely cover. My mother wanted me to... She stopped. She had opinions about what I should do. She picked up her coffee, looked at it, put it down. I didn't ask for her opinions. You kept him, Roman said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was something else, something that was working very hard to stay neutral and not quite making it. I kept him. I found a second job. I moved to a smaller place. I had him in March, and I went back to work 6 weeks later because I couldn't afford not to. She said all of this without inflection, the way you recite facts you've long since made peace with. He's 6. He's in first grade. He reads 2 levels above where he's supposed to. He has your jaw and your stubbornness and an opinion about everything, and I have spent 6 years making sure none of what you are touches him. She met his eyes steadily. Had spent. Roman absorbed this. Outside on Meridian, a truck rumbled past and the windows shook slightly. The woman in scrubs had finished her muffin and was pulling on her coat. Why the name? Roman said. It came out quieter than the rest. Why Vale? Because it's his name. Lena. Because he deserved to have it. She said it without softening it. Even if you weren't here to give it to him, it belonged to him. He looked at her for a long time. She'd expected anger or relief or something she could categorize, something she could manage. What she got was harder. A man trying to hold himself very still while something moved through him that he clearly had no infrastructure for. She watched him press his left hand flat against the table. She watched his jaw work. I didn't choose to disappear, he said. I know. I want you to understand that. Whatever you've... Roman? She cut him off gently but completely. It doesn't matter. Whether you chose it or it happened to you, the result was the same. He grew up without you. That's the fact. The reason is secondary. He looked like he wanted to argue with that, and then looked like he understood he had no standing to. What did you tell him? About his father? That his father was a good man who couldn't stay. She watched his face. Which was what I believed. Which might have been generous, considering. But I wasn't going to let my anger make his history ugly. Roman was quiet for a long moment. A barista dropped something behind the counter and the sound cracked through the room, and neither of them flinched. I want to see him, Roman said. I know you do. Lena, I'm not saying no. I'm saying not yet. She leaned forward slightly. You need to tell me what you walked back into. Because those men last night weren't decorative, and you don't put watchers on someone's building unless you have a specific reason to think there's a threat. So tell me what you brought back with you. He looked at her. Tell me, she said again, or we're done talking. He pulled in a slow breath. He glanced toward the window, toward the sidewalk where his man was stationed, and whatever he was calculating took maybe 4 seconds, and then he looked back at her. You know what I am, he said. What I became. I know what you were becoming when I knew you. I can extrapolate. A muscle moved in his jaw. The organization I ran, she said. Tell me you ran. Past tense would be very useful right now. He didn't correct it either way. There's a rival group, Callaway Network, out of Detroit originally, moved into the South Side 3 years ago. They've been pushing into territory and we've been... He stopped. He seemed to be choosing his words with specific care, the way you navigate a room where the furniture has been moved in the dark. We've been in conflict. It escalated in September. Something happened that they want answered for, and they've been looking for leverage. The cold moved through her very slowly, starting at the base of her spine. Leverage. Anyone connected to me, family, anyone who could be used to... He stopped again. They know about Caspian, she said. His silence was its own answer. She sat back in her chair. She was aware of her own breathing, the specific rhythm of it, the effort it took to keep it even. How long have they known? We think 3 weeks. We. She looked at him. You knew 3 weeks ago, and last night was the first. I was handling it. You were handling it. The words came out very flat. My son has been a target for 3 weeks, and you were handling it without... She stopped herself. She pressed her fingers against the table surface. Roman? I didn't know he was mine yet. His voice was rough at the edges in a way it hadn't been before. I'd heard your name. I knew you were in the city. I was going to come find you to warn you, but I didn't know. He broke off. Last night changed the calculation. Last night changed the calculation, she repeated quietly. That's a very clean way to describe finding out you have a son. He didn't have anything to say to that. She picked up her coffee and finally drank some of it, cold now, and she sat with the weight of what he'd told her. And she thought about Caspian going through that school gate this morning, and she thought about the two men she'd spotted outside her building when she'd left at 8, and she thought, 3 weeks. What kind of threat, she said. Specifically. They'll use him to get to me, to force terms. His voice had gone very controlled. They won't. He wouldn't be harmed. They need him viable to… Stop. She said it sharply enough that the couple 2 tables over glanced up. She lowered her voice. Don't tell me he wouldn't be harmed. Don't soften this. What would they do? Roman looked at her directly. Take him. Hold him. Use him to make me surrender territory and resources and step back from operations. He said it without looking away. And then probably kill him anyway because a loose end that age is… He stopped. Something in his face did something involuntary, and he closed it down. It wouldn't be clean. The room was very ordinary around them. Laptops humming, espresso machine running, someone's phone buzzing against a wooden table in a cheerful percussion. Okay, Lena said. Okay. So tell me what you want to do. He studied her. I have a property. North Shore, off the highway, 12 acres with a security perimeter and a full team. I want to move you both there until… No. Lena, no. She kept her voice level. You don't get to blow up his entire life on day 1. He has school. He has a routine. I worked very hard to give him a routine. She looked at Roman steadily. We increase security on the apartment. You tell me who to watch for. We don't uproot him unless we absolutely have to. We absolutely have to. He said it quietly. The apartment isn't secure. The school isn't secure. The route between them isn't secure. He spread his hands in a gesture that was almost helpless, which looked strange on him, wrong, like a word in the wrong language. This isn't a negotiation about comfort. This is a threat assessment. Everything with you is a threat assessment. Because everything is a threat. They looked at each other. Lena felt the full weight of it land on her. The knowledge that whatever she decided in the next 10 minutes, she was deciding it with incomplete information, under pressure, across a table from a man she had grieved and never stopped knowing and could not entirely trust. She felt the anger underneath everything, the specific old anger of having built something alone that now had someone else's name on it, and she felt underneath even that the exhaustion, the permanent low-grade exhaustion of 7 years of doing this without backup. 3 days, she said. Give me 3 days to figure out a story for Caspian, to arrange things with the school. If nothing happens in those 3 days, something could happen in 3 days. I know that. Her voice didn't waver. 3 days. And your people stay visible enough that I know they're there, but not so visible that my 6-year-old starts asking questions I can't answer yet. Roman looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, could see the risk assessment running behind his eyes, and she held his gaze and did not blink, and finally he said, 2 days. She considered. 2 days. He nodded. She stood, pulling on her jacket. He stood too, automatic, and for a moment they were both standing on the same side of the table with 18 inches between them, and she could see the scar above his eyebrow clearly, and the gray in his stubble that hadn't been there before, and the way he was looking at her like he was trying to reconcile 7 years into a single point of focus. I named him Caspian because it was the name you said you'd give your son someday, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. You told me that once. Late, you probably don't remember. I remember. His voice was rough. I thought it would be something of you that he could have. She pulled her bag onto her shoulder. That's all it was. She left him standing there. The scanning man on the sidewalk tracked her with his eyes as she passed, but didn't move. She walked to her car and sat in it for a minute and let her hands shake on the steering wheel, which she hadn't let them do inside. and then she pulled out into traffic and drove. She had 2 days. She spent the first one making it through her shift at Harlow's and picking Caspian up from school and making dinner and helping him finish the math worksheet and not saying anything that would make him ask questions. She watched the street from the kitchen window while the pasta boiled. She saw the same car she didn't recognize parked across the street, which meant Roman's people, which she'd decided to interpret as reassuring even though it sat wrong in her chest. Caspian asked about the man from the restaurant. He asked it casually over his pasta, in the way children ask questions they've been thinking about for a while and finally find a moment for. "The man last night," he said. "The one you knew. Just someone from a long time ago. He looked at me weird." She kept her face neutral. "Weird how?" Caspian chased a piece of penne around his bowl, like he was trying to figure something out. He looked up at her. "Was he?" She held his gaze. 6 years old and already asking questions like that. "Probably," she said. "Eat your food." He ate his food. He didn't ask again. She lay awake until 2 in the morning and stared at the ceiling and thought about her 2 days and thought about Roman's face when he'd heard Caspian's name and thought about the word viable in the specific way Roman had used it and felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with illness. The second day started ordinary. She was wrong about that almost immediately. She was at the end of her first table rotation at Harlow's, 11:40 in the morning, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She stepped into the service corridor and answered it. "Miss Hartwell?" The voice was male, flat, processed slightly, something in the background that suggested a car in motion. "Don't respond to this call in any way that would indicate you're speaking with someone. Just listen." Her hand tightened on the phone. "Your son's school is very easy to observe from the street," the voice said. "The back gate by the gymnasium is particularly accessible. I'm telling you this as a courtesy." A pause. "We'd like you to tell Mr. Vale that we're interested in a conversation. We'd like you to tell him tonight, and we'd like you to make clear that the timeline we're operating on is not generous." Another pause. "We know about the arrangement you made at Foundry yesterday morning. We know about the North Shore property. We're telling you this so you understand the scope of what you're dealing with." The voice paused once more. "Tell him Calloway sends his regards. And Ms. Hartwell, pick your son up early today." The call ended. She stood in the service corridor of Harlow's restaurant, and the ambient noise of the kitchen, the hissing and clanging and the shouted ticket calls, continued around her as if nothing had happened, as if the floor hadn't just moved under her feet. She called Roman. He answered on the second ring. "They called me," she said. She kept her voice very low. "Just now. They know about the meeting yesterday. They know about the property." She stopped. "They mentioned the school." The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Go get him. Right now. Don't go home. Go straight to him, and I'll send Roman." "Lena, go." She was already moving, through the kitchen, past the startled face of her manager, grabbing her coat and her bag from the back hook, pushing through the rear exit into the cold November alley. "I'm going," she said into the phone. She was walking fast, then faster, turning onto the main street, the wind off the lake hitting her like something physical. "I'm going right now." "My man is 3 blocks from the school, Black Tahoe. He knows your face." Roman's voice was controlled in the specific way of someone controlling it with effort. "I'm already moving. Don't stop for anything." She was already running. She didn't remember the decision to run. Her legs made it without her. Her phone was in her pocket and the wind was in her teeth, and she covered the 6 blocks to Caspian's school in a way she would not have been able to replicate in any context that wasn't this one, some combustion of terror and maternal velocity that had nothing rational in it. She came around the corner to the school's front entrance, and she saw the Black Tahoe at the curb, engine running, and she saw the scanning man from Foundry. Different coat, same eyes. Standing on the sidewalk, scanning the street, and she pushed through the front gate. She went to the office. She said there was a family emergency. She signed the form they put in front of her, and she smiled at the woman behind the desk, with every muscle it took to produce a smile. And she waited 90 seconds while they called Caspian's classroom. He came through the door with his backpack and his jacket halfway zipped and a look of supreme confusion. "Mom, it's not even lunch. I know." She was already crouching, zipping his jacket the rest of the way. Change of plans. We're going somewhere. Where? I'll explain in the car. He looked at her face for a long moment, that old soul look, that reading of her expression that he'd been doing since he was old enough to read anything. Mom, he said carefully, are we in trouble? She held his gaze and she wanted more than anything to say no, and she didn't say it. She zipped the last inch of his jacket. She put her hand on the side of his face. She said, we're going to be fine, but we need to go right now. He read something in her face, and he didn't argue again. She took his hand. They walked out together into the cold November air, and the scanning man fell in beside them without a word, and the Tahoe's rear door swung open. She put Caspian in first. She got in after him. The door closed. The Tahoe pulled away from the curb, and Caspian pressed his face to the tinted window to watch his school get smaller, and Lena kept her hand around his and stared at the back of the driver's head and thought, 2 days. She'd asked for 2 days, and she hadn't even gotten 2. Her phone buzzed. Roman, bringing you to the property. No discussion, non-negotiable. She stared at the message. She thought about the gymnasium gate, easy to observe from the street. She thought about the voice on the phone saying viable. She thought about the 2 days she'd tried to hold on to, the routine she'd tried to preserve, the ordinary life she'd spent 6 years building stitch by careful stitch. She typed back, fine. Caspian turned from the window. Mom. His voice was different now, lower, careful. A child who is being careful sounds nothing like a child who is merely confused, and this was careful. That man from the restaurant. He looked at her. Is he the one who's helping us right now? She looked at her son, 6 years old, dark hair, jaw already showing its future shape, eyes that saw everything and filed it and came back to it when she thought he'd forgotten. Yeah, she said quietly. He is. Caspian turned back to the window. Okay, he said, and then quieter, almost to himself. I thought so. The Tahoe moved north through Chicago, and the lake was a gray flatness to their right, and somewhere behind them the city was receding, and somewhere ahead of them, on 12 acres behind a security perimeter, Roman Vale was waiting, and Lena Hartwell held her son's hand in the back of an armored car and understood with total clarity that the ordinary life was over. Whatever came next was going to... The property was exactly what Roman had said. 12 acres, North Shore, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself from the road. The driveway was unmarked. The gate was set back 40 feet from the highway behind a stand of old oaks that had probably been there before the house, before the perimeter wall, before whatever Roman Vale had turned this place into. The wall itself was stone and concrete, 8 feet, topped with something that wasn't decorative. Lena clocked the cameras at the gate, 2 visible, and at least one she could only infer from the angle. The Tahoe slowed. Something was exchanged with the gate panel, and then they were through. The house was large without being ostentatious, 3 stories of dark brick and glass set back from a lawn that ran toward the lake. The lake itself was visible from the front drive, gray and enormous, the November light sitting flat and cold across it. 2 other vehicles were already parked near the entrance. Men she didn't know stood at positions she recognized as positions. Caspian pressed his face to the window and said, "Whoa." "Yeah," Lena said. Roman was at the front door before the Tahoe stopped moving. He had his phone in one hand and he was already talking to someone on it when he opened the rear door, and he ended the call mid-sentence when he saw Caspian. He stood very still for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped back and gave them room to get out. Caspian climbed down and stood on the gravel drive and looked up at Roman Vale with an expression of frank assessment that Lena recognized as her own expression, repurposed in a younger face. He said nothing. Roman said nothing. The 2 of them stood there in the November cold doing some kind of silent, mutual inventory that Lena had not been prepared for and could not have intervened in if she'd tried. Then Caspian looked past Roman at the house. "Do you live here?" "Sometimes," Roman said. "How many rooms?" "I haven't counted." Caspian appeared to find this answer acceptable. He looked back at Roman once more, that judicial squint, and then turned to Lena. "Can I go inside? I'm cold." She nodded. Roman stepped aside. Caspian walked past him through the front door with his backpack and his half-zipped jacket, and Roman watched him go, and Lena watched Roman watch him, and the whole thing lasted maybe 4 seconds and felt much longer. "The call," Roman said when Caspian was inside. His voice had dropped back into operational register. "Walk me through exactly what was said." She did. She gave it to him in sequence, every word she could reconstruct, the processed quality of the voice, the specific details about the gymnasium gate and the foundry meeting and the North Shore property. She watched his face as she spoke, and she watched the thing that moved through it. Not surprise, he'd moved past surprise sometime earlier, but a tightening, a controlled anger that compressed his features into something harder than his resting expression. When she finished, he stood with his jaw set for a moment. "They knew about Foundry," he said. "Yes." "We swept that location 2 hours before." He said it quietly, almost to himself. "We had eyes on the perimeter. Nobody—" He stopped. She watched him process it. She watched the thing he was processing arrive somewhere that made his expression do something specific and contained. "Roman." "There's a leak," he said. He said it flat and low, like something he'd suspected and hadn't wanted confirmed. "In your organization." He didn't answer. He turned and walked inside. She followed. The interior of the house was warmer than she'd expected. Not warm exactly, but lived in. The heat of a place that had people in it, rather than the sterile temperature-controlled absence of somewhere unused. There was a large central room off the entrance, leather furniture, concrete floors, a long window wall facing the lake, maps on one table, laptops on another. 3 men she hadn't met standing near the far wall, one of them on a phone. Caspian was sitting on the floor near the window, examining something he'd found in his backpack. He had completely evacuated himself from the tension of the room in the way that only children and certain animals can manage, wholly present and wholly elsewhere at the same time. Roman walked to the table with the laptops. A man came to him immediately, late 30s, dark beard, the kind of compact build that suggested economy of movement, and they spoke low and rapid while Lena stood near the entrance and kept Caspian in her peripheral vision. The man with the beard was named Declan. She'd learn that later. Right now she watched him and Roman exchange 4 sentences with the velocity of people who have a shared language built from years of operating together, and then Roman's head came up and he looked across the room. "Get Mercer on a call," he said. To the room, to no one specific. "He's not answering," someone said. Roman's eyes went very still. "What do you mean he's not answering?" "Since this morning. Phone goes straight to voicemail. We had eyes on his place in Bucktown until 8, and then the man speaking was young, nervous, doing something with his hands that was trying to be professional. He was just gone. We can't locate him." The room had gone very quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the person with the most authority has become very still. Lena didn't know who Mercer was. She looked at Roman's face, and she understood from his face that Mercer was significant, and she understood from the specific quality of the stillness that had come over him that the significance was not good news. "Declan." Roman's voice was level in the way that suggested its levelness was a structural achievement. Declan was already moving to a laptop. "Who had access to the Foundry meeting?" Roman said. "Inside the organization. Who knew?" A pause. Typing. Declan said, "You, me, the driver." Mercer coordinated the perimeter sweep. The room was quiet. "Mercer coordinated the perimeter sweep at Foundry," Roman repeated. "Yes." Roman turned away. He put both hands on the edge of the map table and stood there for a moment, and Lena watched his shoulders, and she understood that she was watching a man absorb a very specific kind of betrayal, the worst kind, the interior kind, the kind that comes from inside the perimeter rather than outside it. "He also set up the school," Declan said. He said it like a man confirming something he didn't want confirmed. "The coverage protocol for Caspian's school. He had the address and the schedule because I gave it to him to—" He stopped. "Because he was running the coverage." Nobody spoke. Caspian looked up from the floor. He looked at Lena. She gave him a look that said, "Fine, stay there." He went back to his backpack. Roman straightened up from the table. His face had done the work it needed to do and arrived at something she recognized from 7 years ago. Not anger, underneath anger, the cold floor beneath anger, the place where decisions got made without sentiment. "Find him," he said to Declan. "Everything we have, every number, every address, every person he's spoken to in the last 30 days. I want to know when he made contact with Calloway, and I want to know what he gave them. If he's already with them, then we need to know what they have." Roman looked at Declan directly. "Because if Mercer gave them the full operational picture, the perimeter here is already compromised." The word landed in the room like something dropped. Lena processed it in sequence. Mercer ran the school coverage. Mercer set up the perimeter sweep at Foundry. Mercer, who knew about this property. Mercer, who had gone dark this morning before the phone call that had mentioned the school's gymnasium gate. "How much does he know about this location?" she said. Every head in the room turned to her. "This location specifically," she said. "Does Mercer know about this property?" Roman looked at her. The answer was in his face before he said it. "He coordinated the logistics for the move here last month. He knows the layout, the access points, the staff rotation." She looked at him steadily. "So we can't stay here?" He held her gaze. "No." "How long do we have?" "I don't know." "Best guess." "Hours," he said. "If they moved on it immediately after the phone call to you, maybe less." She nodded. She walked to where Caspian was sitting and crouched beside him. "Hey, we're going to move again, okay? Get your stuff together." He looked at her. "We just got here." "I know." "Mom, we literally just got here." "I know, baby. Come on." He looked at her face for a long moment, and then he started putting things back in his backpack with the methodical unhappiness of a child who has decided that complaining would be accurate but inefficient. Behind her, the room had begun moving. Orders being issued, phones coming out, the controlled rapid motion of people executing a contingency they hadn't expected to need this fast. She stood up. She crossed back to Roman, who was already on his phone, speaking quietly. He held up a finger. One moment, and she waited, and when he lowered it, she said, "Where?" "I have a secondary location. Off book. Mercer doesn't know it." He said it with a certainty she chose to accept because there was no alternative. "West Side and industrial property. Not comfortable. Secure." "Okay." He looked at her. "I need you to trust me." She almost laughed. Not from humor, from the specific exhaustion of the word trust coming from this direction under these circumstances. She said, "I need you to deserve it. Work on that while we drive." They moved within 8 minutes. 2 vehicles. Roman in the front car with Declan and the driver. Lena and Caspian in the second Tahoe, with a man named Reyes who drove with the specific calm of someone for whom driving under pressure was simply a skill, not an experience. Caspian sat beside her and watched the estate disappear behind them and said nothing, which told her more about his state of mind than anything he could have said. They drove south and west. The lake fell away behind them. The city came back, the compressed urban density of it, buildings close and grayed in the November light. Reyes took a route that involved more turns than necessary, doubling back twice in a way that was deliberate, and Lena watched out the rear window and tried to remember what she knew about surveillance and tail vehicles, which was not much and was gleaned from enough television that she couldn't trust it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She answered. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hartwell." Different voice this time. Older. The processed quality was gone. This voice was direct, unmodified, the voice of someone who had decided they no longer needed the layer of distance. "My name is Calloway. Warren Calloway. I want to apologize for the tone of this morning's communication. My associate can be efficient in ways that come across poorly." She said nothing. "I also want to apologize," Calloway continued with the smooth pace of a man who did not experience silence as pressure, "for the situation you found yourself in. This is not a conflict you belong in. You're a civilian. You have a child. I find Roman's willingness to expose you to this kind of risk. Honestly, I find it distasteful." She kept her voice absolutely flat. "What do you want?" "I want to talk to you directly, without Roman in the room." A pause. I want to make you an offer that has nothing to do with him and everything to do with your son's safety. I'm listening. I need leverage with Roman. What I want is very simple. I want him to step back from 2 specific operations and to hand over documentation of a transaction that implicates some mutual associates of ours. That's it. It's a business matter. It has an endpoint. His voice was almost pleasant. I don't want your son. I want Roman to believe I want your son. There's a difference. That's a very fine distinction. It is, but it's an important one, because it means that if you cooperate, if you help me communicate with Roman directly, without his team involved, without the filters, then your son is in no danger whatsoever. This ends quietly. You go back to your life. She looked at Caspian beside her. He had his forehead against the window. His breath was fogging the glass slightly. And if I don't cooperate, she said, then things become more complicated. Calloway's voice didn't change temperature. I have a man named Mercer who has given me a great deal of information about Roman's operational structure. I have the means to use it in ways that will be very damaging to Roman, to his organization, and to anyone closely associated with him. A pause. I'd rather not. I really would rather not. This is fundamentally a financial negotiation, and civilians shouldn't suffer for financial negotiations. She understood what he was doing. She understood it with the specific, clear-eyed recognition of someone who had spent years reading difficult situations quickly and cheaply. He was trying to separate her from Roman. He was trying to give her a reason to become the channel, to become the inside voice, to do for him what Mercer had apparently done. He was offering her safety in exchange for access, and he was wrapping it in reasonableness because reasonable was more effective than threat when you were dealing with someone protecting a child. I'll think about it, she said. Of course. Warmth in his voice now, measured and deliberate. Take the time you need. But Ms. Hartwell, don't take too much of it. He ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she looked at Reyes in the front seat. Get Roman on the phone. Right now. Reyes glanced in the rear view. Ma'am, right now, please. He made the call. He handed the phone back. She heard Roman pick up on the first ring. Calloway just called me directly, she said. Same unknown number protocol. He identified himself by name. He has your number somehow. He called your associate by name on this line, which means... She stopped. He wants me to be his contact inside your operation. He's offering Caspian safety in exchange. The silence lasted 2 seconds. What did you tell him? Roman said. I told him I'd think about it. Which bought me this phone call. Another 2 seconds. He's going to be watching to see which direction you go. If you call me, he knows you didn't take the offer. That changes his timeline. I know. Lena. Roman. She looked out the window at the gray city moving past. I need you to tell me something, and I need the true answer, not the managed answer. She kept her voice level. Mercer. How long was he in your organization? 11 years. Close to you? Yes. Did he know enough to burn everything? Not just this. Everything, the whole structure. The pause was longer this time. Yes, Roman said. If he gave it all to Calloway. Yes. Everything. She stared out the window. Then this doesn't end with us hiding, she said. Does it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. If Calloway has the full picture, she said, then he doesn't need us to hand him anything. He already has what he needs. The offer he made me was never about documents or territory. She worked it through as she spoke, following the logic to where it led and not looking away from where it led. He wanted to know if he could turn me. He wanted to know if I was a tool or an obstacle. She felt something very cold settle into her chest, which means the offer was a test, and now he has his answer. Silence on the line. Roman. Her voice was very steady. He's not going to negotiate. Whatever he told you about wanting territory and documents, that was the reason he gave Mercer. That's not what he actually wants. What does he want? Roman said. Quiet. Already knowing. He wants you gone, she said. Calloway doesn't want concessions. He wants the city. And the only way he gets it cleanly is if you're... She stopped. If you're not a factor anymore. She heard Roman breathe on the other end of the line. "And Caspian," she said, "is the way he gets to you." The car had pulled off the main road. They were moving through an industrial district now. Warehouses, chain link, the smell of the lake gone and replaced by something more mechanical. The second vehicle, Roman's, was ahead of them, pulling into a lot behind a building that had no identifying markings. "We're here," Reyes said from the front. She kept the phone to her ear. "Roman, I heard you." His voice was flat and very quiet. "I heard all of it." "Tell me you have a plan," she said. "Tell me there's something." "There's always something." He said it without conviction, and she'd known him long enough, even across 7 years of absence, to hear the difference. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." The car stopped. Through the windshield, she could see Roman getting out of the lead vehicle. He was looking at his phone as he walked toward the building entrance. He stopped at the door and looked up, and through the windshield and across the lot, he found her through the glass. She looked at him. He looked at her. Caspian stirred beside her. "Mom." His voice was very small. "Are we safe?" She looked at her son. This child who had her stubbornness and his father's jaw and 11 years of accumulated love from one parent and nothing yet from the other. This child who had slept through thunderstorms and never been afraid of the dark, but who was sitting in an armored car in an industrial lot in the gray November afternoon, asking a question she didn't have a clean answer for. She put her arm around him. She pulled him against her side. "We're going to be," she said. She felt him nod against her shoulder. Felt him lean into her with the specific surrender of a child who has decided to take her word for it, who has made the conscious choice to believe her even though he is old enough to know that adults say things they can't guarantee. The trust of that, the weight of it, moved through her like cold water finding every crack. And then Reyes was opening the door and the November air came in sharp and real, and she made herself move. She got out with Caspian's hand in hers. The building was a former machine shop. She could tell from the bones of it, the high ceiling with its rusted crane track, the oil-dark concrete floor, the smell of metal and insulation, and years of industrial use that no amount of retrofitting fully erased. Someone had made it functional. Portable lights on stands throwing yellow pools across the floor, folding tables with equipment on them, a partitioned corner that might have been a sleeping area. 2 generators humming in the back. It was not comfortable. It was, as Roman had said, secure. Roman was already at the main table when she brought Caspian inside. He was looking at a laptop with Declan, something on the screen that made both of them hold very still. He looked up when she came in. His eyes went to Caspian first, which she noted, and then to her. "There's a room in the back," he said. "Cot. Heat. Someone can sit with him while—" "I'm not going in a room," Caspian said. Lena looked down at him. He was looking at Roman with that flat, evaluative expression, and his jaw was set in a way she knew from her own mirror. 6 years old and already done with being managed. Roman looked at him. Something moved in his face that he didn't try to control. He said, "There's food back there. Someone can heat it up." Caspian considered this with the gravity of a diplomat weighing concessions. "What kind?" "I have no idea," Roman said. "Ask Reyes." Caspian looked at Reyes. Reyes said, with the deadpan of a man who had survived worse negotiations, "Soup and sandwiches." "Fine," Caspian said. He went with Reyes without further argument, and the particular tension he'd been carrying in his small shoulders, the tension he'd been carrying and not showing, that Lena had been watching for 2 hours, released slightly as he moved toward something as ordinary as food. She crossed to Roman. "Show me," she said. He turned the laptop toward her. It was a satellite image of the property they'd left, the North Shore Estate, time-stamped 40 minutes ago, 3 vehicles at the gate, 4 more visible on the access road. "They moved on it within 20 minutes of us leaving," Declan said. He said it with the tight precision of a man cataloging his own failure. "If we'd stayed—" "We didn't," Roman said. He closed that line of thinking like closing a door. Lena looked at the image. She thought about the 12 acres of lawn and the lake view and the way Caspian had said, "Whoa," from the car window. She thought about how close 20 minutes was. She thought about Calloway's voice on the phone, the almost pleasantness of it. He tested the North Shore location before he called me, she said. He already knew we'd left. The call was to see which way I'd run. She looked at Roman. He's not improvising. No, Roman said. He knew about Mercer before Mercer went dark. This wasn't a leak he exploited. He built it. Mercer was already his before any of this started. Roman was quiet. How long? She said. We don't know yet. Guess. Declan. Declan pulled up something else on a second laptop. Transaction records, she thought, or something that looked like them. The access pattern on the perimeter logs goes back at least 4 months, he said. Small things. Nothing that triggered flags in real time. He paused. The school coverage for Caspian was the first major handoff, which means Calloway knew about the boy roughly when we did. The cold in her chest had become something structural by now, something she was operating around rather than through. She nodded. Then he's been patient, she said. He waited until we were concentrated in one place, and then he lit everything at once. Yes, Roman said. So what's his next move? Roman looked at her steadily. He'll push on every remaining position simultaneously, every safe house he knows about, every associate who can be pressured. He wants to collapse the network fast before we can consolidate. He put both hands flat on the table. He'll assume we're rattled. He'll assume I'm trying to protect you and Caspian, which limits my operational flexibility. He's right about that. He'll push while I'm divided. She looked at him. So stop being divided. Lena, I mean it. If Caspian being here limits what you can do, then figure out somewhere safer for Caspian and stop being limited. She held his gaze. I'm not a tactical problem you need to manage. Tell me what you need. He studied her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something that was calculating and something that was not. There are 2 federal agents, he said. I've been in contact with them for 6 months. There's an arrangement, information in exchange for certain considerations, long term. He said it without apology. They have a safe house protocol. If I can get you and Caspian to them directly, outside my network where Calloway can't reach, that removes you from the board entirely. Federal agents, she said. Yes. You trust them. I trust that they want Calloway more than they want me right now. He said it with this flatness of a man who had built his relationships on accurate assessments rather than sentiment. That's enough. She considered. And you? I stay here. I deal with Calloway. Deal with, she said carefully. He met her eyes. End it, he said, one way or another. The generator hummed. Somewhere behind the partition, she could hear Caspian talking to Reyes. Some question about the soup. Reyes answering in the patient monotone of a man who was discovering he had more tolerance for 6-year-olds than he'd previously known. Okay, Lena said. Make the call. He was already reaching for his phone when Declan said, Roman. The tone was enough. Roman stopped, looked at Declan. Declan had his eyes on a tablet he was holding, something live on it, a feed of some kind. His face had the specific stillness of someone processing information faster than their expression could keep up with. West perimeter camera, Declan said. He turned the tablet so Roman could see it. Lena looked. The image was black and white, high angle, low light enhanced. The west side of the building they were in. The chain link fence that bordered the lot. And beyond the fence, in the narrow service lane, 2 vehicles parked without lights. When? Roman said. Feed delay is 3 minutes, so Declan looked at his watch. 3 minutes ago. How many? Camera covers 40 feet. I count 4 outside the vehicles. There'll be more I can't see. Roman straightened. He looked around the room. 4 men on his side, counting Declan and Reyes, who was with Caspian. He did the math in the same second she did. East exit, he said. He was already moving, already in that register she'd seen flash briefly 7 years ago, and never fully. The register of someone who thought fastest when the thinking had to be physical. Get Lena and Caspian to the east exit. Reyes drives. Don't stop for... They'll have the east covered, Lena said. He looked at her. If they've been watching us, they know the building. They'll have every exit. She said it with a steadiness that surprised her. You know that. He did know that. She could see that he did. How long until they move, she said. They're already set up. They'll move when they're... He stopped. His phone was in his hand and it was vibrating and the screen read unknown, and she thought, he never stops calling. Roman answered. He put it on speaker. He held it between them. Roman. Calloway's voice filled the metal and concrete space. Warm. Unhurried. I want you to know I'm not enjoying this. Tell me what you want, Roman said. Clipped. He was watching the tablet Declan was holding, the West Perimeter feed. I want Mercer's files back, Calloway said. The copies he made before he came to me. He was careful. I'll give him that. He retained copies as insurance. I want those files, and I want your withdrawal from the Lakeshore Corridor before the 1st of December. And then you and I are finished. You keep what you have south of the 290. I take the North Network, clean line, no further contact. And the woman, Roman said, and the boy, are of no interest to me once we have a deal. Calloway's voice was smooth as something poured. They were a means of getting your attention. Consider it gotten. Roman said nothing for 3 seconds, long enough to sound like he was considering it. Long enough, Lena realized, to be buying time for something he was doing with his other hand. A message. She could see his thumb moving on the phone he was holding away from the speaker. A second phone she hadn't noticed him pick up. I need an hour, Roman said. You have 20 minutes, Calloway said. And Roman, I know where you are. I've known for the last 45 minutes. I want you to understand that I could have moved on this location already. I haven't, because I want the deal. I want it clean. A pause. 20 minutes. The call ended. Roman lowered the speakerphone. He looked at Declan, and something passed between them in the shorthand of men who'd been operating together for years. Declan said, I got 3 of them. Out of how many? 7 confirmed outside, probably 10 total. Declan said it without drama. Our 4 plus Reyes is 5. The numbers sat in the room. Lena pulled in a breath through her nose. She looked at Roman. The federal contacts, she said. How fast can they move? Not fast enough. He said it without softening it. Then we work with what we have. She heard her own voice as if from a short distance. Level, which still surprised her, though she supposed it shouldn't. She'd been carrying hard things for a long time. What do you need from me? He looked at her directly. Stay in the back with Caspian. Stay low. If anything comes through that east wall, the crawl space under the rear loading dock connects to the building next door. Out through the front, north on the street, there's a bus depot, 2 blocks. I'm not going to need the bus depot. Lena, because you're going to handle this. She held his gaze. Tell me you're going to handle this. He looked at her for a long moment. This man who had walked back into her life 3 days ago and turned everything she'd built into a perimeter situation in an industrial lot on the west side of Chicago. This man whose jaw was on her son's face. This man who had gone somewhere terrible for 7 years and come back changed, in the ways people got changed by terrible places, and who was standing in front of her now doing the math on 5 against 10 and not blinking. I'm going to handle it, he said. She nodded once. She went to get Caspian. He was on the cot in the partitioned corner with a half-eaten sandwich. Reyes on a folding chair nearby, doing something on his phone with the studious uninvolvement of a man giving a child the illusion of privacy. Caspian looked up when she came in. We're moving again? He said. Not yet. She sat on the edge of the cot. In a little while. He chewed his sandwich. He was thinking about something. She could see the working of it behind his eyes. Mom, he said. Yeah. Is Roman my dad? She had known the question was coming. She'd known it since the restaurant, since the moment Roman had looked at Caspian the way he'd looked at him, since Caspian had said, I thought so in the back of the Tahoe, with the simple finality of a child who has already done the math. She looked at her son. She thought about the version of this conversation she'd planned, the careful, age-appropriate version, the one with the right amount of information at the right time, the one that didn't happen in an industrial building with armed men outside the perimeter. Yeah, she said. He is. Caspian was quiet for a moment. He finished the last bite of his sandwich. He looked at his hands. How come he wasn't here before? He said. It's complicated. I know you say that about complicated stuff. He looked up at her.
But I'm 6 now. You can tell me. She almost smiled. She pressed her lips together instead. He thought he couldn't be, she said. He thought staying away was keeping you safe. He was wrong about that, but that's what he thought. Caspian appeared to weigh this with the same judicial deliberation he gave math worksheets. Is he fixing it? He said. He's trying to. Right now? Right now. Another pause. Okay, Caspian said. He lay back on the cot and looked at the ceiling. The soup was good, he added. If you're wondering. She put her hand on his chest, felt his heartbeat, steady, regular, the heartbeat of a child who had decided to trust her. And she sat with him in the yellow light behind the partition while the generators hummed and she listened to everything she could hear from the main room. She heard Roman's voice, low and rapid. She heard Declan. She heard the movement of men checking weapons, the particular sounds of that, the sounds she'd been pretending her whole life she didn't know how to identify. She sat with her hand on her son's chest, and she listened and she breathed. It started 11 minutes later, not from the west where the cameras had shown them. That was what they'd been meant to see. It started from the roof. She heard it before she understood it, a concussive thud above the crane track, then another. Then the high ceiling above them rained insulation and dust, and the portable light swung and one went out, and the main room went to 1/3 illumination, and she heard Roman shout something she couldn't make out, and she was already moving. She pulled Caspian off the cot. He didn't make a sound. He came up fast and held onto her arm with both hands, and she felt his breathing, quick and controlled, and she thought, he's braver than he should have to be. Down, she said. Stay with me. Don't let go. I know, he said. Glass somewhere in the main room, the high windows on the west wall, safety glass. It didn't shatter so much as fracture and cave. And through the gaps she could hear the cold air coming in and shouting from outside. And then a sound she knew was a gunshot, and then several more in quick succession, and the lights in the main room swung again, and she pressed Caspian flat against the partition wall. She heard Roman's voice through the noise, 2 words, her name, directional, finding her even across the chaos. She came around the partition. The main room was moving in fractured light. 2 of Roman's men at the west wall, covering the broken windows. Declan at the east door, which was still holding. Roman was crossing the floor toward her with something in his face she hadn't seen yet. Not fear, past fear, something that had burned through fear on the way to something more absolute. He reached her. He put one hand on the side of Caspian's head briefly. Just once, just that. And Caspian went very still under his hand and looked up at him. There's a car in the loading dock, Roman said. He was talking to her, but he didn't look away from Caspian. Gray, Reyes is driving. The dock connects to the service alley on the north side. Roman. This from Declan. Sharp. Roman turned. The east door was moving, not breaking. The hinges were good, and the brace was good. But something was being applied to it from the outside that was systematic and patient and would eventually win. A low rhythmic impact. Something mechanical. 30 seconds, Declan said. Roman looked at Lena. He took her by the arm, not hard, precise, and walked her toward the rear of the building and through a secondary door she hadn't seen because it was inset in the wall beside a shelving unit, and it opened onto a ramp that dropped to a lower level, colder. The dock bay. A gray sedan idling with Reyes in the driver's seat. He put his hand on the door handle and he looked at her. He's going to be all right, Lena said. She didn't know who she meant, Caspian or Roman or herself. Maybe all of it. The federal contacts, Roman said. He pulled a folded card from his jacket, pressed it into her hand. Agents Maris and So. Their cells are on there. Tell them Roman Vale is calling in the arrangement. They'll move. He looked at her. They'll keep you safe until this is finished. And if it's not finished, it's going to be finished. He said it with the particular flatness of someone who has made a decision they can't walk back. One way or another, before morning. Caspian was looking up at Roman from beside her. He was still holding her arm with both hands, but he was looking at Roman with that expression, the direct, no-performance look of a child who is paying full attention. Roman looked down at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Caspian said, "Come back." It was very simple. 2 words, no elaboration.
The request of a child who has already done a great deal of waiting for a person and is prepared to wait a defined amount more, but would like the parameter established. Something moved through Roman's face that he made no effort to manage. He crouched down so he was eye level with his son, and he held the look for a moment, and then he said, "Yeah, promise," Caspian said. Roman looked at him steadily. "I promise," he said. Caspian nodded once, with the gravity of a child accepting terms. He turned and climbed into the back seat of the gray sedan and slid over to make room for Lena. She looked at Roman. He stood up. He looked at her with everything he wasn't saying moving behind his eyes, and she looked back with everything she wasn't saying, and they stood like that for 3 seconds in the cold of the loading dock, and then above them, the east door gave way with a sound like a bone breaking, and the main room erupted. She got in the car. Roman was already turning, already moving back up the ramp, already gone into the noise and the fractured light, and Reyes had the sedan moving before her door was fully shut, and the dock bay's rear panel slid up automatically, and the night came in, cold, black, the narrow service alley ahead of them, no lights. Reyes drove without headlights for the first 100 feet. She had the card in her hand. Maris and So. She found her phone. Behind them, from the direction of the building, she heard it. Not individual shots anymore, but something more continuous, a sustained exchange, and then what sounded like a vehicle impact, metal on metal, and then silence for 3 seconds that felt much longer. And then a single shot. One shot. She did not let herself interpret it. She found the number on the card. She dialed. It picked up on the second ring. A woman's voice, awake and alert at... She looked at the dash clock. 2:14 in the morning. "This is Maris." "Roman Vale is calling in the arrangement," Lena said. Her voice was completely steady. "He said you'd know what that means." A pause. "Where are you?" She looked at Reyes. He said a street name without being asked. She repeated it into the phone. "Stay in the vehicle," Maris said. "Don't stop for anything. We're 12 minutes out." A brief pause. "Is Vale with you?" Lena looked back through the rear window at the direction they'd come from. The building was out of sight now, swallowed by the industrial district's dark geometry. She couldn't see anything. She couldn't hear anything over the engine. "No," she said. "He's not with me." Caspian was pressed against her side, his forehead against her shoulder, his breathing slow and deliberate in the way of a child working very hard to be calm. She put her arm around him. She held the phone to her ear. Maris was saying something about coordinates and protocols, and she tracked it and answered appropriately, and she kept her arm around her son, and she looked out the window at the dark city moving past. She did not think about the single shot. She held Caspian. She breathed. She kept her eyes forward. The sedan moved north through the November dark, and the cold pressed against the glass, and somewhere behind them, Roman Vale was either finishing it or the sedan had been moving for 4 minutes when Lena's phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it. Caspian had his eyes closed against her shoulder, not asleep, his breathing too controlled for sleep, just a child doing the thing children do when the world becomes too much, retreating behind closed eyes into whatever interior space still felt manageable. She looked at the unknown number and she thought about Calloway, and she thought about the single shot, and she answered. "Ms. Hartwell?" A man's voice, not Calloway, younger, less smooth, something ragged in it. "My name is So. I'm with Maris. You just spoke to her. We need to tell you something before we meet." She said, "Tell me." A pause. The kind that was actually something being decided in real time. "We have contact with a unit that was monitoring the Vale property on Dunning Street tonight. There was an engagement approximately 9 minutes ago." He stopped. "Mr. Vale was... There were injuries. He's been transported. We'll take you directly to the hospital when we make contact with your vehicle." She sat very still. "Is he alive?" she said. Another pause, shorter this time, which she told herself meant something. "Yes, he's alive. The details are... We'll know more when we get there." He paused again. "I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone. Maris and I are 4 minutes out." She thanked him. She didn't know why she thanked him. She ended the call. Caspian's eyes were open. He was looking up at her. She looked down at him. She kept her face still in the way she'd spent 7 years practicing. The specific arrangement of features that said, difficult but manageable, hard but not unsurvivable. We are all right. He's hurt, Caspian said. Not a question. Yes. But alive. Yes. Caspian nodded. He put his head back against her shoulder. She felt him breathe, shots in, out, slow and deliberate. She put her cheek against the top of his head, and she looked out the window at the dark, and she did not let herself do anything yet with the word injuries. The sedan pulled to the curb. 2 minutes later, a dark SUV pulled in ahead of them, and a woman got out. Mid-40s, close-cropped hair, a federal badge on her belt that caught the streetlight briefly. She walked to the sedan's rear window, which Reyes lowered. "Lena Hartwell," she said. "Not a question either." "Yes." "I'm Maris." She looked at Caspian, then back at Lena, and something in her professional expression did something brief and almost human. "We're going to Northwestern Memorial. It's 12 minutes. Do you want to switch vehicles or follow?" "Switch," Lena said. "I want to be in the same car." Maris nodded. She opened the rear door. Caspian got out first, which he did without being asked, with a self-possessed practicality that still caught Lena off guard. This child who had never had the luxury of falling apart in public and had learned that early and worn it quietly. In Maris's SUV, the second agent was driving. So, younger than his voice had sounded, a focused economy to his movements. Maris sat in the front. Lena and Caspian sat in the back, and the city moved around them at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning, mostly dark, mostly empty. The streets between them and the hospital, unremarkable and strange. "What happened?" Lena said. Maris turned slightly in her seat. "Calloway moved on the building with 7 men. Vale's team was 5, including Vale. There was an exchange inside the building and in the service alley after." She said it factually, the way you deliver hard information when you've learned that clean facts are a kindness. 3 of Calloway's men are dead. 2 apprehended. Calloway himself. She stopped. "What?" "He's dead." Maris said it without particular inflection. Vale found him in the building's upper level. Based on what the unit observed and what we've reconstructed, it was a direct confrontation, one-on-one. She paused. Calloway didn't survive it. The city moved past the windows. Vale took 2 rounds, Maris continued. Upper left quadrant and his right side. He was stable when the ambulance made contact. She looked at Lena steadily. "Stable is real. I'm not softening it." "I know," Lena said. "Thank you." Caspian was looking out the window with his forehead against the glass. His breath fogged it slightly. She watched him breathe, and she thought about what stable meant and didn't mean, and she held herself together with the infrastructure of 7 years. "Mercer," she said. Maris turned forward. "Already in custody. He made contact with our office this morning, before the engagement tonight. He was trying to negotiate." A pause. "He didn't get the deal he was looking for." "What did he get?" "What's appropriate," Maris said. It was as much as she was going to say. Lena accepted that and let it go. They reached Northwestern Memorial at 2:31. The emergency entrance was the particular controlled chaos of a hospital at night, efficient and urgent, the urgency wearing the costume of routine. Maris moved them through it with the specific ease of someone accustomed to making institutions open for her, and a woman in a white coat met them near a set of double doors. "He's in surgery," the woman said. "The right side wound needed intervention. There was arterial involvement. He's been in for 40 minutes. We'll have more information in another hour." Lena nodded. She said thank you. She sat in the chair they pointed her to, and she pulled Caspian against her side, and she waited. Caspian fell asleep sometime after 3. She felt him go. The gradual heaviness, the slow release of all that deliberate control, his body finally accepting that it could stop performing alertness. She arranged him so his head was on her thigh, and she kept her hand on his back, and she sat in the hospital waiting room under fluorescent light, while Maris and So spoke quietly near the corridor, and she waited. So brought her coffee at 3:40. She drank it without tasting it. At 4:15, the surgeon came through the double doors, still in her cap, pulling her gloves off with the practiced motion of someone doing that for the 10th time that night. "He's out," the surgeon said. She had the manner of someone who had learned to be specific because specificity was the only mercy available. Both wounds are repaired. The arterial involvement was significant, but we got ahead of it. He'll be in recovery for several hours and ICU for observation after that. She looked at Lena. He's strong. The next 12 hours matter, but he's strong. Lena exhaled. It was a very slow exhale. She felt it leave her body like something she'd been holding since the sedan, since the single shot, since before that, since the restaurant maybe, since Roman Vale had walked through the door of Harlow's on a Tuesday night and looked at her son. "Thank you," she said. The surgeon nodded and was gone. Lena looked down at Caspian asleep across her legs. His mouth was slightly open. His dark hair was falling across his forehead. In sleep, the deliberateness left his face, and he was simply 6. Simply her son, simply a child, with a marshmallow jacket bunched under his head as a pillow, and his worksheet probably still in his backpack somewhere. She put her hand on the side of his head. She let herself feel it, just for a moment. The full weight of the last 72 hours, the full accumulated pressure of 3 days that had dismantled the life she'd built and replaced it with something she hadn't chosen and couldn't return from. She sat in the hospital chair and she let herself feel it, and she did not cry, because she was too tired to cry, and because Caspian was asleep on her legs, and because the surgeon had said strong, and he's strong was something she was going to hold on to. She let herself feel it, and then she breathed and she put it away. They let her see Roman at 6 in the morning. He was in the ICU, a room of glass and soft light, and the particular institutional hush of a place organized around the sounds of machines. He was awake, barely, the specific barely of someone with serious anesthesia and serious blood loss still working through them, the eyes open but doing most of their work just staying open. He had lines in his left arm and a monitor on his finger, and his right side was bandaged under the hospital gown, and he looked, for the first time since he'd walked back into her life, like someone who had reached the outer limit of what a body could absorb. She sat in the chair beside his bed. He looked at her. His eyes tracked her in, tracked her sitting down, tracked the absence of Caspian with her. And then the question formed slowly in his face. "He's asleep," she said. "Maris is with him in the waiting room." He exhaled. It sounded like it cost him something. "Calloway," he said. His voice was very rough. "I know," she said. "Maris told me." He looked at the ceiling. He was quiet for a moment. "Mercer," he said. "In custody. Maris said this morning." He absorbed this. His left hand, the one without lines, lay at his side against the sheet, and she looked at it. The new scar across the knuckles she'd noticed at Foundry, and the older one below it, and the general biography of damage that a decade of the life he'd lived had written on him. She looked at his hand and she thought about 11 years. She thought about a man who had worked beside Roman for 11 years and had been turned quietly and patiently into an instrument of destruction. She thought about the phone call from Calloway and the gymnasium gate and the 3 weeks that Caspian had been a known target while she'd been buying bread and helping with worksheets and not knowing. "Why'd you do it?" she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended. He looked at her. "Calloway," she said, "you could have let your men handle it. You didn't have to—" She stopped. She looked at his right side at the bandaging. "You didn't have to be the one." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Yeah, I did." "Roman." "Because it ended with me," he said. Flat, like a statement of structural fact. "Because if I handed it off, there's always a next one. Someone who knows Calloway, someone who knew Mercer, someone who thinks they can take what Calloway was trying to take." He said it without looking away from the ceiling. "If it ends with me, it ends clean." She looked at him. "I'm not doing this anymore," he said. She waited. "The organization," he said. "What's left of it after Mercer and tonight, I'm not rebuilding it." He said it without drama, in the flat register of a decision that had been made somewhere inside the machine shop building before any of it had started, maybe, or on the roof when they came through, or in the upper level with Calloway. "Declan can take what's left and transition it out. There are people I owe clean exits to. After that—" He stopped. "After that, it's done." She looked at him for a long moment. "You could have made that decision 7 years ago," she said. She said it without accusation, just true. "Yeah." He didn't qualify it. "I could have." "You didn't?" "No." Silence. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," she said. "What Caspian missed, what I—" She stopped. "I'm not going to say it's fine because you're saying the right things now." "I know." "That's not how it works." "I know," he said again. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at her directly for the first time since she'd come in. His eyes were very tired and very clear in the particular way that serious pain and serious blood loss leaves eyes. No performance left in them, no management, just the person underneath everything. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. What you do with that—" He stopped. "That's yours." She looked at him. She thought about the restaurant on Tuesday. She thought about Foundry on Wednesday, and the gray sedan in the industrial building and the single shot at 2 a.m. She thought about Caspian saying, "Come back," and Roman crouching down to be eye level with him. She thought about 6 years of doing this alone. 6 years of making the choice every single day to build something decent from the material she had. And the material she had had always included the outline of this man, the absence shaped like him, the name she'd written on a birth certificate with steady hands. She thought about all of it, and she made no decision yet. She wasn't going to make a decision at 6 a.m. in an ICU room while he was attached to monitors and she was running on no sleep. That wasn't how she made decisions. But she reached out and she put her hand over his, the one with the scars on the knuckles, the one lying on the sheet. He looked at it. He turned his hand over slowly and held hers. They sat like that. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The light in the room was very soft. Outside the glass wall, the hospital moved in its quiet way, nurses crossing the corridor, a cart being pushed, the ordinary language of a place built around the premise that people could be repaired. She stayed until 7. Then she went back to the waiting room where Caspian was awake and eating something from a vending machine that So had apparently made happen, with the look of a child who has discovered that federal agents are useful in specific ways. She sat beside him. He leaned into her. "Is he okay?" Caspian said. "He's going to be." Caspian chewed whatever he was eating. "Can I see him?" "Later, when he's more awake." He nodded. He ate another bite. He said, without looking at her, he promised. "I know." He kept it. She looked at her son. This boy who parsed things quietly and filed them and came back to them when she thought he'd forgotten. This boy who had asked her once what his father's name meant, Caspian, for the sea between known things and unknown things, and had been satisfied with her answer in the way children are satisfied when the answer confirms what they already believed. "Yeah," she said. He kept it. The weeks that followed had no clean shape. Roman stayed in the hospital for 9 days. The arterial repair held, the infection risk they'd worried about didn't materialize, and on the 9th day he walked out with Declan beside him and moved into a rented house in Evanston while the North Shore estate was assessed and cleared, and the 12 acres of lawn and Lake Michigan views were put through a process she didn't fully understand, but that Roman said was necessary before it could be anyone's home. The federal arrangement moved forward. Maris and So had been working Callaway's network for 18 months, and Roman's information, the full operational picture, delivered through lawyers over 4 methodical weeks, gave them what they needed to dismantle the remainder of it. The names Mercer had provided went into the record, and against those names went charges that Maris had described as comprehensive, with the particular satisfaction of someone depositing something into an account they'd been building for a long time. Roman's own situation was what Maris called complex, and what his lawyers called manageable. The arrangement had always included provisions for cooperation. The cooperation was, by any measure, substantial. No charges were filed. Certain historical matters were closed. It was not, as Roman said once, justice in any clean sense of the word. It was what was available. Caspian went back to school on the Thursday of the 2nd week, in his marshmallow jacket, with his backpack and his worksheet folder. And Lena watched him go through the gate and sat in her car for 3 minutes, and felt the particular relief of the ordinary that she'd been reaching toward through all of it. Roman came to pick him up once the following week. She'd told him he could, after they'd talked about it, after they'd had several conversations that were neither easy nor resolved but were honest. The specific honesty of two people who have been through something and have no energy left for the managed version. He stood at the school gate at 3:15, and Caspian came through and stopped when he saw him, and they looked at each other. She watched from the car. Caspian said something. Roman answered. Caspian considered the answer and then fell into step beside him as they walked toward the car, not touching, not performing anything. Just a man and a boy walking, the boy talking with the specific velocity of a child who has been storing things to say all day and has found a recipient. Roman listened. He kept his hands in his coat pockets and he walked at the pace Caspian set, and he listened. She watched this. She was not all right yet. She was not close to all right in the ways that mattered most. There were nights she lay awake calculating distances between where she'd been and where she'd ended up, measuring the cost of every choice, grieving in the specific quiet way she'd always grieved things, which was alone and without ceremony. There were mornings she looked at Caspian and felt something complicated about the fact that his father was now a presence in his life, something that was not entirely resentment but lived in the same neighborhood. She was not all right yet, but she was moving. Spring came in the grudging way Chicago spring came, late and reluctant, and then sudden, the cold giving up in increments until one morning the lake was blue instead of gray, and the light was a different temperature, and the trees on the North Shore property were doing something optimistic with their new leaves. The estate had been cleared. Whatever it had needed to become that was different from what it had been, it had become. Roman had moved there in March, alone, with a small staff and a reduced footprint, and the beginnings of what his lawyers were documenting as a legitimate holdings company built from the assets that hadn't been surrendered in the federal arrangement. He'd asked once if she would consider bringing Caspian on weekends. She'd said she'd think about it. She'd thought about it for 3 weeks, and then she'd said yes. The first weekend in April was warm enough for the lawn. She brought Caspian on a Saturday morning and watched him see the lake for the first time in daylight. The real lake, blue and enormous, the kind of thing that made you understand the word vast. And he stood at the lawn's edge with his mouth open and said nothing, which was remarkable for him. Roman stood beside her on the back porch, and they both watched him. He doesn't talk, Roman said, when something actually gets him. No, she said, he doesn't. He must get that from you. She looked sideways at him. There was something in the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile. She said, "Don't push it." He didn't push it. They stood on the porch and watched Caspian approach the lake with the careful wonder of a child encountering something that confirmed rather than surprised him, as if he'd known the lake was there, had always known, and was merely confirming the physical fact of it. "I'm going to teach him to ride a bike," Roman said. "If you—" He stopped. "If that's all right." She looked at her son at the water's edge, and she thought about the years of it, the single-parent Saturday mornings, the trying and failing with training wheels in the parking lot behind their building, her back aching and Caspian gritting his teeth, and neither of them giving up, but neither of them quite getting there. She thought about 7 years of things that hadn't happened that should have, and she thought about what was actually on offer right now, in this moment, on this specific Saturday morning with the lake blue and the light warm and her son standing at its edge. "Yeah," she said. "That's all right." Later that afternoon, in the open stretch of the driveway beside the east garden, Roman steadied the back of a bicycle and Caspian sat on it, with his jaw set in the particular Roman veil expression of a person who will not acknowledge the possibility of failure. Roman held on and ran with him and let go, and Caspian went 3 feet and corrected and went another 4 and wobbled and went another 6 before he hit the grass and went down with a sound of pure outrage. He got up. He got back on. She watched from the porch steps. She had her coffee and the warm April air and her son's outrage every time he fell and his absolute refusal to stop trying, and she watched Roman run beside him again, and she watched him let go again, and she watched Caspian go farther this time, 10 feet, 12, 15. And then he found it, that sudden balance that couldn't be taught or explained but only arrived, and he pedaled away from Roman down the length of the driveway, and the sound he made was pure and total and nothing like his usual guarded self. Roman straightened up. He watched his son ride away from him. He stood in the driveway with his hands at his sides, and he watched, and she could see, even from the porch, the quality of what was in his face. She sat with her coffee. She sat with the fact that she had given her son a father's name for 7 years before the father was present to claim it. She sat with the fact that the life she'd built was not gone. It was here. It was altered. It had new weight and new shape, and in some places still raw edges. She sat with what it had cost to get to a Saturday afternoon in April on a North Shore lawn, and she sat with what the cost of not getting here would have been. Caspian made the circuit of the driveway and came back, braking badly, stopping himself with one foot on the ground in the specific inelegant way of a child who has just learned something and hasn't learned it fully yet. He was breathing hard. His hair was across his forehead. He looked at Roman. He said, "Did you see?" Roman looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "I saw. The whole thing. The whole thing." Caspian looked at the bike. He looked at the driveway. He looked at Roman with the same flat, evaluative expression he'd worn since the restaurant, since the first time he'd looked up and seen his father across a room full of noise, and then slowly, with the deliberateness of a child who does not give things away cheaply, he smiled. It was Roman's smile. Exact. She'd forgotten how it arrived. The reluctance of it, the way it came in spite of itself, like something that had been holding out and couldn't anymore. She turned away. She looked at the lake. She let the moment belong to them. The afternoon moved slowly, and the light moved across the lawn, and she sat on the porch steps, and she felt the season turning under everything. Winter releasing its claim, the cold that had been structural since November beginning, finally, to mean something different. Not warmth yet. Something more honest than warmth. The acknowledgement that what had been frozen was beginning to move. She had not forgiven all of it. She was not going to say she had. The years of it, the years he'd been dead to her, and alive somewhere else. The years of doing it alone. The years of building a shape of a man from memory so that her son could have something. Those years did not dissolve because he was standing in a driveway on an April afternoon. They were part of the material. They were woven in. But she looked at Caspian at the lake's edge one more time, his back to them, his face to the water, and she thought, he is not carrying what he could have been made to carry. He is carrying only what I gave him, which was everything I had, which was enough. That was true. That was going to stay true. She put her cup down on the step beside her. She stood up. She walked across the lawn toward the water where her son was standing, and the spring light came off the lake in the particular way it did in April. Not generous yet, not warm yet, but present and clean and enough. She stood beside him. He leaned against her without looking away from the water. "It's really big," he said. "Yes," she said, "like, really big." "I know." He thought about this. Behind them she heard Roman's steps on the gravel coming slowly their way, unhurried, not forcing anything. She didn't turn around. She looked at the lake with her son, and she felt Roman stop a few feet behind them, and she felt the particular arrangement of the three of them, the 6 years between then and now, the Tuesday in November that had started all of it, the careful and costly distance between what a life looks like from the outside and what it costs to build it. Caspian reached up and took her hand. He thought about it for another moment. Then he looked back over his shoulder at Roman. "The lake's really big," he said, as if reporting a fact that Roman might not have known. Roman looked at it. He put his hands in his coat pockets, and he stood in the April light, and he looked at the lake with his son. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The water moved. The light moved across it. And there on the North Shore lawn, in the slow, warm turn of a season that had earned its arrival, 3 people stood together at the edge of something enormous and let it be enough. There are secrets that never die.